Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Talk with Tubbs, a petrolhead's perspective. As always, I'm your host, Tapelo, aka Tubbs, and I'm going to talk you through this podcast that deals with everything motoring. We're going to talk what's new on the market, what's old on the market, what's good on the market, and also what's bad on the market. Then we're also going to delve into some motorsport, but more focused on my favorite form of motorsport, Formula One. We're going to talk driver lineups, what we feel, react, but most of all, I'm trying to give you a petrol head's perspective. Words that come from someone who's as passionate about the industry as anyone I know. So as ever, let me not waste your time. Here we go. Talk with Tubbs is a go.
Right. So I've been quiet for a bit now. Look, things get hectic on this side. And whenever I'm not recording anything, it's because something came up and I just haven't found the time. And I feel like this always happens whenever there's something super serious or something super entertaining going on. Because from the weeks that I haven't really recorded anything, motorsport has been exceptional. You're looking at Formula One, that's been amazing. You're looking at MotoGP, the end of the season, that was great. And I'll get into Formula One later today because I have a lot to get off my chest with this podcast. But I'm going to start with something you didn't expect. So over the past weekend, I had actually forgotten about this simply because this is not a racing series that I follow enthusiastically or consistently. I always bump into the races simply because I might be up at the time, or something happens and you kind of want to check it out. So that's what I'm talking about. This previous weekend was the Bathurst 1000, or as the Aussies will call it, Bathurst. But yeah, Bathurst 1000. If you don't know, the series is Aussie Supercars, or just Supercars now. V8 powered, kind of touring-esque cars, reminiscent of their road going counterparts, Holdens, Mustangs. So very interesting racing series. Like I said, I don't follow it consistently, but I tend to bump into several races throughout the season simply because I'm awake. Now, going into this race, like I said, I knew nothing about this, and it came to my attention when I saw a video of Chaz Mostert setting the lap record during qualifying, which was on Saturday. Brilliant lap. Bathurst is quite a challenging track. I think it's 6.2 kilometers long, has a maximum elevation of something like 100 meters, I think, slightly more, I think. Power circuit in the first and third sector, but the second sector at the top of the mountain is super technical, walls on both sides. You just need to nail it, but you need to be brave as well. If you've played Gran Turismo, but most of them that I can remember have Bathurst, or I think it's written as Mount Panorama on the game, which is where the track is situated. So yeah, just check it out on the game if you have. That was my first introduction of the track. I'd always known about the race. I knew it existed, but I never quite knew which racing series it was a part of, simply because I'd seen the track being used for GT3 racing. So whenever I thought Bathurst, my association was with GT3 racing. So I watched the race and man, was it good. That was a good race. It's 1,000 kilometers, which equated to 161 laps. It's more enduro race. It was the final race of the supercar season. And yeah, man, it was amazing. It was amazing. I'll tell you how close it was. Over 161 laps. The top two were neck and neck within 2 seconds of each other up until the final, I think it was 5 laps to go, when Shane van Gisbergen's tire delaminated, so he had to go in and pit. And to show how close it still was, he pit and he came out in 14th. 14th. We are talking about an endurance race that had 25 entries, and the person was P2, pit with 5 laps to go, and he came out in 14th. Such was the competitiveness of the grid and how close it was. It was a brilliant race, man. Brilliant. I loved every second of it. I don't know if I'll watch the rest of the series from next year, but Bathurst 1000 is definitely one of the races you have to watch. It is interesting. The driving on display. Chaz Mustard won the race. Like I said, he broke the lap record during qualifying on Saturday. And on Sunday, when he was doing the final stint with I think he came in with about 25 laps to go, he was on it, man. He was on it. Very rarely do you see guys pushing in a race. There's competition, but very rarely do you see guys pushing in a race to the extent that they do during qualifying. At one point, he was running less than 2 seconds from his qualifying time. I think he did dip under 2 seconds as a delta from his qualifying time. He was on it, man. The speed he was able to carry and the precision with which he was able to drive during the second sector, which I said is so technical at the top of the mountain. You have walls on both sides. You really don't want to lock up. You really want to get your braking points correct. You really want to get your steering points correct. You just want to position the car perfectly to maximize the speed going into those slow corners and ultimately going out of the slow corners. He was so brilliant in that sector. That's where he was beating the competition. So yeah, if you get a chance, try and find the highlights of the race. But yeah, next year, definitely set a reminder for the Bathurst 1000. Oh, and yes, the overall championship was won by Shane van Gisbergen. Brilliant campaign. Like I said, I wasn't following on, but I knew his stats. In a 31 race season, right? Listen to this. In a 31 race season, Shane van Gisbergen had 14 wins and 23 podiums. In a 31 race season, he had 14 wins and 31 podiums. Man was driving like a maniac. And at the start of the season, he had a broken collarbone. So for, I'll say, the first quarter of the season, he was not at full fitness. He was driving with an injury. How about that? So yeah, that's definitely something you want to check out. But yeah, man, that race put a smile on my face. The coverage started at 3 a.m. on Sunday. So Sunday was a very, very long day for me. You can imagine Bathurst 1000 in the morning and yeah, Formula One later that day, which is something that was a handful or a mouthful or an eyesore. So many ways to discuss Formula One. And I'm about to do that right now because there's a lot we need to talk about there. So before we kind of talk about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix and kind of give my thoughts on the current situation in Formula One, I just want to talk about something really interesting that happened in Formula One. And that is Mercedes' massive improvement in speed or pace or whatever you want to call it. But going into Brazil, Max Verstappen had taken 2 consecutive wins in COTA, Circuit of the Americas, and the Mexico City Grand Prix. So the momentum was with him. And then you go into Brazil, and then it's so difficult, right? Because you go into Brazil and Lewis Hamilton takes a new engine, right? And subsequently gets, is it 5-place grid penalty? And we had a sprint weekend. So, of course, Brazil, we know how good that track can be for racing, but I don't think we expected it to be that good. I won't bore you because we're really so far away from what happened there. But I found it very interesting that the speed that Mercedes seemingly found from that weekend onwards, and that's really what's propelled the Drivers' Championship to what it is now, and that's really awoken Lewis Hamilton's season. He went on to win in Brazil, he won in Qatar, he won in Saudi Arabia, obviously. Am I missing a race there? But yeah, look, like I'm saying, the interesting things that came out was the obvious improvement in pace, particularly in top speed, because that was one of the main talking points that was focused on was Mercedes' massive improvement in top speed. But it was the way I saw it, it was pace all around the circuit. It was massive improvement in the corners. It was massive improvement on the straights. And one of the things that was spoken about so passionately, or I'll say passionately because of Red Bull, they kind of went to protest about this, but it also became a topic of conversation, was what caused this massive improvement in speed and pace. A lot of people said it was the engine. And of course, the engine will play a role in ultimately the ultimate performance of the car. As we know, the Mercedes cars, their engines tend to really lose a lot of performance the older they get. So with how their engines seem to work, a new engine will definitely give you an improvement in performance and improvement in pace. Whether that can be sustained over a season, we know it's a bit difficult for Mercedes this year with the engine. But I kept watching it, and for countless times we've heard this about Mercedes, and I think it was Andrew Chauvelin who came on after the Brazilian Grand Prix, and he was doing an interview, and he said they haven't brought any upgrades from the upgrade that they had in Silverstone, which is way back in the season, to now. The only thing that was different in Brazil, apart from Lewis Hamilton's fresh engine, was their setup philosophy. So it seemed as though so late into the season, Mercedes had finally cracked the code on how to set up their car, how to maximize the inherent pace within that car. Now, if you go back to last week's podcast, well, not last week, but the last podcast I uploaded, I was talking about who has the faster car. And again, Formula One is a sport of margins. And I think for a long time now, amongst fans on social media, we've sort of demonized the concept of the faster car. But that's inherently the pace. That's inherently the goal or the aim of motorsport. It is to have the faster car, simply because having a car faster than your competition increases your odds of winning a race. That's just the point. So instead of congratulating teams for building a car that's quick, for building a car that's formidable, that's difficult to beat, we've kind of demonized them, and we've diminished the work that goes into creating the fastest car, but we've also diminished the individual performances of the drivers that drive these cars, right? But I digress. Again, going back to the previous podcast where I was talking about the fastest car, I spoke about setup and how difficult it seemed for Mercedes to get their car in an operating window where they could maximize what was available for that weekend. And again, the words of Andrew Chauvelin kind of enlightened me, where he said, we kind of ditched our usual setup route and we tried to find different ways to set up the car. We knew what we had. Obviously, there are certain things we won't change, but we just tried to go about it with a different mentality. And I think that's really it. Sometimes the sum is greater than its individual parts. Sometimes to get the performance, it's all about a different mindset. It's all about how do we change the toe? How do we change the camber? How do we change our aero setup? How do we improve on this? How we decrease there? Sometimes those individual changes, and you can understand why it would go unnoticed, why it would go underutilized, if I can say it like that, throughout the whole season, because it's small things, sometimes. And again, I'm not a mechanic or anything like that, but I've played sport for a large portion of my life, and I still follow a lot of sport for a large portion of my time. And sometimes to get those incremental performances, to get better, to do something differently, we tend to look at the bigger stuff. What do we need to change? Do we need a massive development in aero? Do we need a massive development in engine? Do we need to change the engine modes? Those are big changes that sometimes don't yield the results that we're expecting. But once you put together minuscule differences, minuscule changes with how you set up or how you do things, we see this in any other sport. You look at rugby, for example. Teams can change their defensive structures. How do we rush up? Do we hold back? Do we hold a straight line? How many players do we commit to the breakdown? You see this with soccer as well. Do we have 3 defenders at the back? What is the pace we use when we're passing the ball? What are the calls we use for set pieces? It's always the small things that tend to lead to bigger things. And again, it's very easy to ignore or be oblivious of these small things until you start to do them and you see the results that you've always wanted. So concerning Mercedes' sudden increase in pace, and I know now that we're 3 races in with them having this super competitive car, dare I say the fastest car at the moment, super competitive, fast car, drivers are confident, drivers are satisfied with the performance. I just think it's them continuously working throughout the season to find, dare I say, this hidden performance of the car. Look, when we say the W12 is slow, when we compare it to the W11, it's not that it's essentially slow. It's just that it's difficult to get it where it is. Like I said, Formula One is a sport of margins. 0.2 slower per lap is huge because how do you cover 0.2 when the pilot of your car, your driver, is already maximizing or putting in the maximum of their effort? That means you have to look elsewhere to find that performance. So I just thought it interesting to cover that I think teams continuously have to work within Formula One. They continuously have to find improvements, no matter how minuscule, because that's just the nature of the game. And some teams, especially 2021 is really weird because, like I've spoken about countless times on this podcast, we are looking at the 2022 changes in essentially everything. We're looking at a different sized car. We're looking at different aero philosophy. We're looking at different designs. So a lot of the resources this year have been allocated to the development of next year's car and next year's philosophy. So when you're looking at 2021, not a lot of teams are bringing in upgrades. I know Red Bull have brought significantly more upgrades than Mercedes, but the main thing is to maximize on the package that's already there. You look at teams like Ferrari, when they brought in the new energy store upgrade, that seemingly transformed their season, So sometimes a little upgrade like that, an energy store upgrade or the aero upgrade that Mercedes had in Silverstone, that can be enough to kind of give you a level footing or a solid foundation to build upon when you want to find that inherent pace or that lost or hidden speed. So yeah, I just think it was very interesting to see the changes that Mercedes have made and just to see how that came to the fore, because after those changes in Brazil, we suddenly had Lewis Hamilton saying, I love the car we have now. I love how it does this. Yes, there hasn't been problems. You're looking at something like the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, the performance of the car on the softs. I think that was a universal problem within the paddock, but it's a problem nevertheless. But the confidence that Mercedes seemingly have in their current equipment from Brazil up until now, and the confidence that Lewis Hamilton has, I think they could not have found the right formula at a better time for the season, for the team, for their confidence, and just to ensure that the title decider is literally the last race of the season. As we're talking now, you're probably going to hear this Friday at the start of the race. We're level on points. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen are level on 369.5 points. And whoever wins the final race of the season is going to win the title. So, yeah, I think Mercedes might have just struck gold with the timing of them finding this hidden pace within the car. Okay, so last chat, and this might be a long one, so excuse the length of the podcast and the subsequent topic that I'm going to talk about. But I think it's so important for where we are to kind of put into context on how did we get here? How did we get to the end of the season, first of all, with Our title protagonists equal on points. How did we get to this part of the season with one team seemingly so confident and another team seemingly under pressure? How did we get to this point of the season where we are so stressed and so afraid of the top two guys having to go wheel to wheel? How did we get to this point of the season where the governing body, the FIA, is just floundering and continuously having a misstep after a misstep after a misstep? How did we come to the end of a season that looks set to be so brilliant? And it is, but how did we get here? How did we get to this current point? And I think this is the crazy part of this season, because we're all going to have so many different opinions about what happened last week, what is happening now, how should the season end. We're all going to have an opinion about what happened throughout the season. And of course, it's so difficult to talk about these things as a fan, because you do have inherent biases. You do have a favorite driver. You do have a team you support. But sometimes you kind of have to rise above that. Sometimes you have to put yourself in a position where you're looking at the facts and you're trying to have a conversation about the current state of the Formula One season without these biases. And yes, they will creep in. I've made it no secret that sometimes I can be biased. I am a Lewis Hamilton fan. I am a Mercedes fan. For as long as I've watched Formula One, I've watched Lewis Hamilton. He's been a driver that I support continuously, even when he wasn't winning, even when he was under the cosh, even when he was struggling. I've always been a fan. So yes, the bias is there, but I think I'm going to highlight a few things that I feel like have gotten us to this point. And this is what I'm going to start with, right? Throughout the whole season and throughout the whole title challenge, look, at this point, it really seems like everything concerning Formula One is about Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Red Bull, Mercedes. It's really about those four. But that's just the way the season has played out. Those two teams and those two drivers have just been a cut above everyone else. And you see this with how those two guys have driven against their teammates. They've just been above, more competitive, faster, more consistent than their teammates. So yes, the conversation is mainly going to be about them. And this is where the conversation is going to be for the rest of this podcast as well. We're going to but we're really not going to focus too much on everyone else. So throughout the whole season and throughout the title challenge, throughout any skirmishes that these drivers have had, throughout the incidents that Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen have had, lap 1, Imola, lap 1, Spain, the incident at Silverstone, the incident at Monza. One thing that was apparent was how Red Bull tried to play the narrative that Max Verstappen isn't feeling pressure. And I think that talk, in a sense, kind of ramped up after Brazil when Hamilton was so dominant, and it became a thing on social media as well, that Max isn't feeling the pressure. And whenever Lewis Hamilton came out and said, I can understand the kind of pressure that Max is in fighting for your first title, people called it mind games. People called Hamilton saying that him playing to the media, him pandering to the fans, him playing a game. And I remember explicitly saying to my dad and my friends who we watch Formula One with, that I think Max Verstappen is feeling pressure. He's just doing a good job at hiding it, or his team is doing a good job at hiding the pressure by being so vocal about him not feeling pressure. So we think the team feels pressure instead of the driver. And I put it on Twitter as well, that the gravitas of what is happening and just the inherent nature of professional sports, Formula One, football, rugby, whatever it is, a top professional or someone at the top of the sport feels pressure every time they have to perform. It's how they deal with that pressure that sets them apart from you and I, the laymen who are the fans of the sport, but it also sets them apart from other competitors within the sport. And that's why in actually all sporting codes, you can point to people you feel are cut above. These are the GOATs. These are the people we have debate on countless times. Who's better? Is it Messi? Is it Ronaldo? Is it Hamilton? Is it Schumacher? Is it Senna? Is it Dan Carter, Sonny Bill Williams? Doesn't matter what sport you're watching. There are people that are a cut above. And a lot of that is down to how they handle pressure. And I remember this being something that circulated a lot on social media, where people were saying, oh, Max is gaming the night before a race weekend. He's really not feeling the pressure. But again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reading this because I'm tainted by my own experiences. I game when I'm feeling stressed. I game to alleviate pressure. I game to reset my mind, simply because it's so far removed from whatever is stressing me at that particular moment, be it academics, be it life. You game to take your mind away from all that stuff. You game for an hour, game for 2 hours, just get your mind right. So whenever I saw that Max Verstappen was gaming, that's what I got. I was like, he's doing normal stress management, and everyone has a different coping mechanism. If for him it was gaming and chilling with friends, you look at Lewis Hamilton, fashion, music. For years he's spoken about his love for music. He's playing the piano, singing. Even Valtteri Bottas has said countless times you hear Lewis Hamilton singing from his trailer. So everyone has different ways to deal with the pressure. Everyone has different ways to de-stress. So I found it really disingenuous about how Red Bull kept on saying, oh, Max is not feeling the pressure. If he wins this title, it's whatever. If he doesn't win this title, it's whatever. But all this came to a foot in Saudi Arabia, where now all of a sudden, Max, who has been this calm-headed individual, who's been this consistent competitor, now all of a sudden he's crying on the radio. Oh, this, and don't get me wrong, it's perfect to cry on the radio. It's perfect to want advice. It's perfect to want to point out things drivers are doing on track. It's what every Formula One driver does. Yes, it's tainted by the broadcast that we watch, because we know they have control over which radio messages are put on the live stream for us people to see. But these things happen. Now, all of a sudden, you get to Saudi Arabia and Max Verstappen is very vocal about what's happening on the track. And then you start to see the way he's driving. And I think I've put it down here on my notes as abhorrent driving. I found his driving to be so dangerous. I found his driving to be of such a nature that we would never deem just. And this is me ignoring everything that's happened throughout the season. This is me ignoring the other instances. This is me ignoring him missing the apex and going off track at turn 4 in Brazil. This is me missing the contact at Imola. This is me missing the really aggressive move at turn 1 in Spain. This is me ignoring everything that's happened throughout the whole season. And this is me solely focusing on Max and his team's actions at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And what I picked up from that was Red Bull are under pressure, because ever since Mercedes came back with this impressive pace, Red Bull have said they must be cheating. And it's this they must be cheating that led to the ultimate disqualification of Lewis Hamilton from qualifying in Brazil. But keep in mind, that's not why. That's not the thing they said Mercedes were doing. Lewis Hamilton was disqualified for a seemingly broken wing. By the words of the FIA, they said it wasn't an intentional contravention of the regulations. It seemed as though the rear wing of the Mercedes had a problem. So Red Bull had argued that Mercedes' rear wing was too flexible and it was deforming. So that kind of spurred the attention of the FIA onto the rear wing, but it wasn't found that Mercedes had a flexible rear wing. And this continued. And I was like, this is really weird at how Red Bull was so persistent. We'll investigate this if we see this in Qatar. And it went on and on about it. And what I picked up from that was, I think they're feeling the pressure. I think they played the whole season as level-headed, as confident, as though they won't be pulled into the nitpicking of teams, as they won't be pulled. And I found those characteristics, those chats, as them feeling pressure because they've been developing their car throughout the season. They put their car in front, but all of a sudden they didn't have a reply for what was the Mercedes package. Again, maybe this is a tad biased because I'm a Mercedes fan, but this is just an observation I got from watching. And again, Christian Horner gave a hint of this after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix when he was asked, so where's your focus now for the end of the season? And he said, look, make no mistake, the constructors title is where the money's at, but the prestige of the sport is within the driver's title, and that's where we're focused at now. So it seems to me that they've totally given up on the constructors title. They think Mercedes have it wrapped up. It's a huge discrepancy in points, and Mercedes look to be the front runners for that title. But this inherent push, this nature, this desire to have Max Verstappen be a drivers' championship with Red Bull, he is the wonder kid of Formula One. He is the guy that's been touted to be a talent, one of the best drivers on the grid currently. Forget the thing that they keep sharing on social media, that he's one of the greats of the sport. Based on what? Based on what? Is he a good driver and one of the best on the grid right now? For sure. A great of the sport? No chance in hell. But I found the team to be cracking under pressure. And now you see that with Max Verstappen. The pressure is manifesting in how he's driving. Like I said, isolate the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Forget about the rest of the incidents throughout the season. Look at how he lunged. No, look at the mistake he made in qualifying. No doubt about it. He was on a brilliant lap, and everyone talks about, oh, Max was on a world level lap, which is actually the words I used on Twitter as well. He was on this brilliant lap. He was almost 3/10 faster than Lewis Hamilton in the first and second sector. But all that doesn't count if you cannot keep your composure when it matters. And he couldn't, and he binned it. He touched the wall in the third sector, and that was lap over. That was qualifying over. Yes, he had a good banker lap, and that essentially guaranteed third place for him. But he still made a mistake at a crucial point in the season, very late. And ultimately, I don't think that crash will change anything in the season. If I'm articulating myself properly, the crash doesn't mean that much because he still got to start a race in P3. But it is the driving from the same weekend which seems to be the turning point in the season. It is that driving, that aggression, those mistakes that seem to be the chink in the armor, that seems to be the manifestation of pressure. Look at how he went over the curbs off track, blocking Lewis Hamilton, coming back on track so aggressively. Look at the brake check incident. I don't care what you think about that incident. The telemetry and the investigation from the FIA, who, again, I have words about later, but the investigation proved that he was driving in a manner in that instant that wasn't conducive, and he braked erratically. An added pressure of 69 bar that resulted in a braking force of 2.4 G. That's a brake check, my friends. You know the position of the other driver. Now we can have a conversation about why Lewis Hamilton didn't pass, etc., etc. It's been talked about to death. And yes, you're going to be listening to this podcast and maybe you haven't seen it, but I do guest appear on a radio show where I talk about Formula One, and I spoke about this in depth and in length. No matter what happened in that situation, and no matter what we can take away from that situation, the brake check is a thing. And Max Verstappen was driving in an abhorrent manner, in a way that you just cannot make excuses for. A lot of the time during the season, a lot of the things he has done has been marginal. It's been really about interpretation, but the overarching reaction to that was, it's really teetering on the line of good or bad. It's marginal. And depending on how you look at it, you might pick up something different about it, you know? But the racing, the driving and the etiquette and the respect he showed to Lewis Hamilton, who just seemingly, again, the season has just played out that it's him and Max Verstappen. But the way he was driving just showed how he's feeling the pressure. And I'm sorry to say, but a 10-second penalty for a brake check on arrival in a race so close to the end of the season is a slap on the finger, not even on the wrist, because ultimately that penalty meant nothing. He was 16, 17 seconds ahead of Bottas, who finished in P3. So 10 seconds changes nothing. 2 penalty points on his license changes nothing. That penalty changes nothing to the season. Again, those are grounds for disqualification. Why is Michael Massey now telling the teams that intentional moves like this will result in a points deduction or a disqualification? Why couldn't he do it in Saudi Arabia? Again, now let's get into the FIA, because I've spoken at length about Max's disgusting tactics on track. Now let's talk about the organizing body, who have seemingly lost control, who have seemingly shown that they are afraid to remain impartial, that they are afraid to enforce the rules. Why did we have an incident where the FIA is negotiating with a team? How does that happen? How does that happen? Forever and a day in Formula One, if there was a penalty to be given, a penalty was given. Why are we sitting here and negotiating to hear what kind of terms the teams would prefer? How would they be happy to restart the race? And again, people have had issues with the calls that the FIA and the stewards have made throughout the season. So have I, to be fair. But I've always tried to steer clear of questioning their integrity, questioning their involvement. I've simply just said they just weren't good enough. But now I've realized that it's really not a case of being good enough. It's a case of being, I wouldn't say incompetent, but borderline incompetent. Because one of the competencies of a referee, of an adjudicator, of a steward should be the impartiality and confidence to dissect a situation, view a situation based on its merits, and give punishment based on that. You should not be afraid to take a stand as an adjudicator, as a steward, as a referee in whatever sporting code that you're involved in. So to see the FIA so afraid to put blame on Max Verstappen for his antics in Saudi Arabia, so afraid to put blame on Max Verstappen for his antics in Brazil, so afraid to make a decision that could ultimately lead to a shift in the Drivers' Championship is appalling, to say the least. That is not how you do your job. Yes, I'm not a steward. Yes, I'm a guy sitting in a room recording a podcast on a laptop. Yes, I'm a fan, but I do understand the fundamental principles of being a ref, of being an adjudicator, of being a steward. And that's impartiality, that's confidence, that's competence, that's knowledge in what you're doing. Being afraid to take a stand, being afraid to dish out penalties, bending at the mercy and will of teams, negotiating punishments, straying away is not doing your job. Look, no one, me included, no one wants the Formula One season, the title, to be decided by a steward's decision. But if a driver is not playing ball, if a driver is being overly aggressive, if a driver is being dangerous to the well-being of their rivals, of another driver, if a driver is pulling kamikaze moves, then unfortunately the stewards, the FIA, have to get involved in that situation, because then you are setting a precedent that certain things can be done and no repercussions will exist. Like I said, the 10-second penalty was nothing. That's why Lando Norris was so confident in making the joke when he was questioned today whether how will he beat Charles Leclerc for P5 in the championship. And he said, well, I might as well brake check him because the penalty for that is 10 seconds. It sounds like a joke to everyone else, but it's a dig at the precedent that the stewards are setting. Even Max Verstappen has said he doesn't understand, which he was talking a lot of utter shit when he said drivers are treated differently from him. He feels penalized for things other drivers get away with. Mate, you're the last person to talk about getting penalties. But he was right to question, and this is the point. He was right to question what the motif, what the reasoning, what the logic is behind some of the decisions that the FIA has made. Because similar antics that he's made in Brazil and didn't get penalized for, got penalized in Saudi. See what I mean? That's what I was saying way back when. certain decisions lead to a precedent being set. If you are afraid to penalize a decision, drivers will continue in that same vein. And eventually, once you deem it too dangerous and you penalize the decision, then they have a platform, they have information to point back to and say, you never penalized this kind of behavior before. I honestly, I don't know what needs to change in the FIA within the stewards. Do we need new stewards? Do we need people with a different mindset? But whatever the case is, we cannot continue. Again, this is passion because I love Formula One. I love the sport, but we cannot continue in this sport with stewards, referees, the FIA being afraid to get involved in the title. And by get involved, I'm not saying manipulate the results or intently manipulate situations to favor one driver or another. No, I'm simply saying keep it fair and keep it just. But if you're afraid that inflicting a penalty on a driver will decide a championship, then mate, you are not fit to be a steward. You are not fit to be an adjudicator. You are not fit to be the jury in such a situation. Because like I'm saying, if one driver is not following the rules, if one driver is constantly being the one found at fault for issues, if one driver is endangering the lives of others, then you do not have any other responsibility apart from getting involved and controlling the narrative, dishing out penalties. Whether that decides the championship or not is immaterial. Look, we've seen this before with Michael Schumacher crashing into Damon Hill, crashing into Jacques Villeneuve to try and win the title. And he was disqualified with the Villeneuve incident. We've seen this with Senna crashing into Prost, Senna crashing into Mansell. We've seen these kind of tactics. Yes, it wasn't the same set of stewards then, but there is precedent to say when these decisions happen, you intervene and a disqualification is on the cards. I honestly believe, and this is not how I want Lewis Hamilton. Again, this is my bias. I am a Lewis Hamilton fan, and this is not how I want Lewis Hamilton to win his 8th. But I do believe a disqualification from the Saudi Arabian race was on the cards for Max Verstappen simply because of the moves he pulled. Because again, going by what the stewards said from their investigation and what led to the ultimate penalty, if you are saying he intentionally braked erratically to the danger and detriment of another driver, what is the difference between that and intentionally crashing into them? Because that led to a crash. It's these actions. Once you prove and once you agree that there is intent, then a penalty cannot be the equivalent to the penalty for a mistake. It has to be a harsher penalty so that the consequences of said action are actually felt. Like I said, the 10-second penalty does nothing. So ultimately, all these things, Mercedes increase in pace, Red Bull feeling the pressure, Max Verstappen crumbling under the pressure, driving like a donkey on a Formula One track, endangering the lives of other people, the FIA not being able to make a decision, the FIA showing incompetence on how to do their job, the FIA being afraid of being the FIA is how we got to this point. It's how we got to the point where the title protagonists are level on points. We're going into the last race of the season. We have a winner-takes-all situation, but we are deadly afraid of having our title protagonists together on track. We are deadly afraid to see them racing wheel to wheel. I said this back in Saudi, watching the Formula 2 race, way before Formula 1 quali. I said, I'm already stressed if Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton find themselves in P1 and P2 going into the first corner. What happened? There was contact. What happened? Max Verstappen went off track. That is what I'm saying. We have that's all how we got to this point where we are so stressed about the end of the season, where we are so stressed about the final race of the season, where we are so stressed about what could happen on track that leads to someone making history, breaking barriers, getting the 8th title and being the most successful driver in Formula One, or someone winning their first title and fulfilling a childhood dream of theirs. We are afraid of what could happen on track. That's how we got to this point. That is how we got to this point. So yeah, look, you're going to listen to this podcast, and this is going to be the race weekend, before the race weekend. Listen to this podcast, go into the race weekend, and try and enjoy it. As will I. As much as I'm excited, I'm still stressed and scared of what could happen on track. But I still want to see it play through. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Talk with Tubbs. A really passionate rant, a really passionate words from a fan, from someone who loves the sport, from someone who cares so passionately about the sport. It's been a long season, and to be sitting here for the first time in my life, drivers have been equal going into the final race. It's happened once before, and that was in 1974. It's going to be a banger conclusion to the season. Again, Abu Dhabi is different. They've changed the track layout, so predictions and stuff might not even come true because so many things will be different. But I'm excited. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Thank you for listening to me throughout the season. Thank you for engaging with me on social media. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for giving your time, the most precious resource on earth, time. Thank you for listening to me. I honestly, I enjoyed making these podcasts, man. And I hope the future looks bright for me because I'm going to try my best to keep them coming. But thank you for sharing your passion, sharing your time with me as I share my time and passion with you. Thank you so much for being a friend. Thank you so much for being a fellow supporter. As always, thank you for tuning in. Follow me on social media, all that other stuff. I'll link my profile in the description. Guys, for the last time this season,